Hey guys, it's Stephanie and I'm here to talk about the last couple books I read in February, and it's a lot of good ones, so I'm really excited to talk about it. And then after I'm done talking about the books I read, I'll talk about the books I got at the library, so this will kind of be like what's next. The first book I want to talk about is Penance by Kanae Minato. I read Confessions by her last year and thought it was just so crazy and fun, and it was just a great thriller. This is a little more subdued than Confessions. Penance is about a murder that happened in a small rural town in Japan. There was a group of 5 friends and they were enjoying a day off from school, like playing at a park, and a strange man approaches the group and asks one of them for help. He says he's a maintenance man and he needs help like reaching into a vent or something. Anyway, he takes one of the girls, and when she's been missing for, a few minutes, they go looking for where he said that they would be, and they find her dead body. And so this takes place like 2 decades after that has happened, and you really are going through each of the girls and how this murder has affected their lives and their different part in how they reacted to the murder. So like, for example, one of the girls, her job was to like stay next to the body, and her story is all about how staying next to that body and seeing like the dead body of her friend and what was done to her friend, basically what that has done psychologically to her as an adult. And all of these things play out in kind of a dark way. And so like the girl that went to the police, like how her having that part in that really affected her life. In the story, the mother gathers all of the now women together that were there and basically gives them kind of an ultimatum. I guess at this point in Japan, when this book was published, there was a statute of limitations on murder. I don't think that's the case now, because there was like a note in front of it that basically said, hey, at the time this was written, this was the way it was. So she's saying that the statute of limitations for finding who her daughter's murderer was is coming up. And she basically places blame on all of them and says that they are not being honest about what they saw, and that she thinks they remember a lot more than they do. And so it's really dealing with like the aftermath of what has happened because of this murder. And I thought it was really well done. I will say, I buddy read this with Amber over at Amber Eats Books and Candace Rosado. The one thing that we kind of had a hard time with was the way things are wrapped up. I think it's supposed to be wrapped up in a way where like everything comes full circle and it makes sense, which was not the way it felt for us. I think it left us with more questions than answers, but not in a way that ruined my reading experience. I thought the way the characters were drawn and the way we see their specific traumas play out, and the way that their relationship with their friend who was murdered, affected the trajectory of their lives was absolutely fascinating. Kanae Minato does a really good job of writing from the perspective of all of these people going through all of these things. It was really good. I think now I'm up to date on her works that have been translated into English, so I'll be waiting for the next book that gets translated from her, because so far she's been 2 for 2. The next book I read was a ebook, and it was a novella called Stirring the Sheets by Chad Lutzke. This one is hard to categorize because it's not quite horror. It deals with a grotesque subject matter, but it's not scary. I will say this is more of a grotesque slice of life story, but it's about a older man who is a mortician. He's a widower. He has lost his wife. He's basically at this point where he can't move on. He's stuck in this place and he just is grieving, has left his life at a standstill. And he is at the mortuary one day, and there's a dead body that looks like what his wife looked like when she was younger. In his grief, he takes the body and he brings it home and lays in bed with it so that he can pretend that it's his wife. And it was good. I know that sounds odd, and it is an odd story, but I think the point of it is to really explore the irrationality of grief, and I think that he did a really good job, and I really felt for him, and I thought the writing was very emotional and did a good job at really tapping into those emotions, so that in a sense you kind of understood what he was doing and why he was doing it, even though it is, a strange thing to do. Also, like, the only thing that is against it is kind of the length of the format that is a novella, and since we're kind of just getting a snapshot, things kind of all get tied up at the end, which I think for a story that is that dark and emotional maybe is what you want in that story. But that was Stirring the Sheets by Chad Lutzke. I will definitely be reading more from him. He does a really good job of just being able to tap into these deep emotions with his words, for sure. The next book I read is a book that is currently a nominee for the Bram Stoker Award for First Novel, and that is The Rust Maidens by Gwendolyn Kiste. This is about a young woman named Phoebe who is coming home to Cleveland, and she is reminiscing about the things that happened there in the 80s, the summer that she graduated high school. There was a group of girls on her street that went through a very inexplicable transformation where their skin and their body started turning into rusted metal and like broken glass. They were called the Rust Maidens. I think Gwendolyn Kiste is a great writer. Like, a lot of this was very literary, and you kind of have these chapters of like looking back and trying to kind of put together what happened, because one of those girls was her cousin that she was very close to, so she kind of has these emotions and she kind of blames herself and kind of wishes that there was more she could have done. I saw someone describe this as Rust Belt Gothic, and I thought it was just the perfect categorization for like what this was. This was like a commentary on suburban life and this small town, and how this suburb and the culture around it could be stifling, and these girls kind of had no way out and were going to be stuck there forever, and a lot of it was very tragic. One of the girls was a teen mother and she had just given birth, but because of what was happening to her, there was no way for her to hold her child. So I thought she did a very good job of kind of this coming of age story in a way. I would not say this is horror. Like I said, I love the Rust Belt Gothic terminology just because of like almost literal decay of these girls and like what they were turning into. I would say this also, I might classify as like speculative fiction, like dark speculative, Gothic, literary coming of age. Like, there's a lot of labels you could put on it. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. I currently have And Her Smile Will Untether the Universe on my Kindle, which is her short story collection, and I'm really excited to get to that because I was very impressed by her writing ability in her novel. The next book I read was Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I did read this for the Books in the Freezer book club. This was our first book that we picked. Everyone seemed kind of split on it. I feel like maybe I'm the only person in the group that like really loved it. This is a coming of age story of a boy who is being raised by his aunt and uncle and his grandfather, and they tell him all of these stories about being werewolves and the do's and don'ts on how to be a werewolf. And the main character, who is unnamed, is kind of getting to that age where he's wondering if that transformation is going to happen to him. This had a lot of great themes of identity. I loved the like werewolf aspect. I would say like there's points where you're reading it and you're not sure if the werewolf thing is even real or if it's really just kind of an explanation that they use to make their transient lifestyle more palatable for a young child. One of the things that people didn't like about this is that it's kind of written in these short stories that are vignettes, so there's not really a plot that connects everything together. It's just kind of snapshots of different events in his life that really kind of explain who he is and really explain the werewolf thing and the story of this family and why they are how they are. And so I just really loved it. I love Stephen Graham Jones's short stories that I've read. I really enjoyed his novella, Mapping the Interior, and this was just a win for me. I think the way it was set up and everything, and the coming of age aspect and the characters and everything just totally worked for me. Apparently was not the case for everybody else. So that's just my opinion. I loved this. That was Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. The next book I read is also currently nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for a young adult book, and that is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. So this is a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but from the perspective of Elizabeth, who in the story, I mean, doesn't really like have a lot to do. So in this story, we are getting her side of things and how she came to be with the Frankenstein family, and in a way that gives her more agency. So in this story, she was an orphan. She was living with this abusive family when the Frankensteins came and were kind of looking for a companion for Victor. And she talks about how the first time she met him, she knew that, you know, there was something off about him, but she saw this as her only way out. And throughout the story, you kind of see that she's a person who like is doing what she has to do to survive. So to get out of this situation, she basically agreed to do whatever it took to be a suitable companion to Victor. So throughout the story, you see her as a character who is doing what she needs to do to survive in this world that was not made for women and was not made to give women agency in their decisions. So it was very interesting. I loved the way it tied together with the plot of the Frankenstein story, how things end up for her. I thought it was a very compelling story. I read most of the nominees on the young adult list for the Bram Stoker Awards, and this so far has to be my favorite, I think, of everything that's nominated there so far, with Dread Nation coming in at a close second. I'm not a huge zombie fan, but I really enjoyed that one as well. So I really think it's going to be between those two for that category. That's just my prediction. And lastly, I read the third book in the Wayward Children series by Shannon McGuire, and that was Beneath the Sugar Sky. Also recently, Leanne at Literary Diversions mentioned something that I didn't notice about the way the series is set up, is that one is set basically in present day, and then one is a prequel, one is present day, one is a prequel, which is something I had not put together on my own. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway, and it takes place at a school where children who have gone to magical worlds like Alice in Wonderland, like where does she go when she comes back? How does she function in everyday life? That's basically the premise of the story. This is a place for those children who have spent time or what seems like years or lifetimes in these magical worlds, and like how this is a place basically for them, and some of these children are waiting for those doors to be opened to them again, and for some children that happens, and for some children it does not. So that's basically like the premise of it. So that's the first story. Then the second book, we get the backstory of the twin characters who were sent to the same world but kind of had different roles in this world. So there's, you know, one book where you're at the school, one book where you're delving into the different worlds that these characters went into, which is really interesting. So this one takes place in present day at the boarding school, but a girl seemingly falls from the sky and ends up on the grounds, and she is claiming to be the daughter of a character who was murdered in the first book. So there's some problems because that isn't possible, and there's kind of a Back to the Future thing where she's like, no, like we need to find my mom, and like I'm disappearing, and if she doesn't exist, I don't exist. It's gonna happen. It kind of turned into a big ensemble adventure story, which I really liked. And there's so much about this writing and these stories that feels really cozy. I just really love these books, and I didn't think I was gonna like them. This is something that was really out of my comfort zone, but I've ended up just like fully invested, and I positively enjoy whenever one of these new books comes out. I am currently on the wait list at my library for the fourth book in An Absent Dream, which I think is supposed to go into like one of the characters that was in a goblin world, I think, if that's correct. Anyway, really looking forward to that. And now for the books I got at the library. So last video, I think I mentioned that I loved Lost Boy by Christina Henry, even though the ending kind of let me down. Still loved it. And everyone told me I should pick up Alice by her, which is the kind of dark retelling of Alice in Wonderland. So I did pick this up. I'm really excited to get to it. This is one I've been eyeing for like a few years, so we'll see. Just finished Blackbirds by Chuck Wendig, which is the first in the Miriam Black series. So I picked up the next book in that. This is Mockingbird by Chuck Wendig. I also picked up Popular Hits of the Showa Era by Ryu Murakami. I will read the back real quick. The young men are lost. The highlights of their lives are eating beef jerky and spying on a neighbor undressing. The women, the Midori Society, for they came together over their unusual name, lead insular lives, barely tolerating the interruption of a child or ex-husband. Taken by an inexplicable urge, one of the young men spontaneously attacks and murders a Midori, which leads to a fiercely, meticulously strategized war between the two groups. Best of all, Having found a sense of purpose, they're having the time of their lives. Who knew that plotting revenge could be such fun? Murakami builds the conflict into an explosive, hilarious meditation on modern life. So we will see. This I saw on a lot of lists for like funny horror or like horror comedy. I don't know how much like horror it is. I think it's going to be bloody. So we'll see. And then a book that I feel like I requested months ago, but I think I was on a long wait list because I think my library only has one copy, was Uzumaki by Junji Ito. And Devin, my co-host for the Books in the Freezer podcast, recommended this, and I think this is the book we've gotten the most like positive feedback back from, that people have said they picked up because of the podcast and have enjoyed. I have never read manga, I don't even know how to pronounce it before, so yeah, it opens like back to front. I'm gonna have to figure out like what order I'm supposed to read these panels to because I don't know. But this is about a small town where like people start seeing spirals. The town is haunted not by a person but by a pattern. Uzumaki, the spiral, the hypnotic secret shape of the world. The bizarre masterpiece of horror manga is now available in a single volume. Spirals. This town is contaminated with spirals. So we shall see. I have literally heard like nothing but good things about this book, so I'm excited to get to it. I did not think it would be this long though. This is like a brick. Wow. And then I picked up, like I bought, that my library was selling, was The Favorite Sister by Jessica Knoll. This is a thriller. I picked it up because the premise is that in this book, like they're filming like a kind of Real Housewives type story called Gold Diggers, about like young female entrepreneurs. I have a soft spot for fiction that deals with reality television. I don't know why. I'm not a big Real Housewives fan. I do watch The Bachelor. I did grow up watching like Survivor. So I definitely like watch reality TV. I just never really got into Real Housewives. But I just like am always fascinated by like fiction tackling reality television. I am just really interested in the producers and the way that the show is produced and so much about it. I might have to do a video on that sometime of like why I'm interested in it. But this is like there's a group of sisters and I think one is more popular and she gets murdered. I don't really know. They just had me at reality television. I've heard kind of middling reviews on this. The ratings on Goodreads here kind of lean more towards a 3. So we'll see how it is. But anyway, guys, that's what I read and what I will be reading. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.